Tim King visits the region to push for installed peace efforts. Houthis continue to impose restrictions of movement on women in the areas under their control. Human Rights Office in Jove documents Houthi violations committed against civilians in the city. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rushan Fuad. The U.S. State Department announced the Special Envoy Tim King is visiting the region to push for the installed peace process. Worth mentioning, Yemen has been in the state of truce of no truce since Houthis rejected to extend the UN ceasefire on the 2nd of October 2022. This report has more on this.
The U.S. State Department said Tim King, the U.S. envoy to Yemen, will begin a visit to Saudi Arabia and Jordan to advance peace efforts led by the United Nations. The statement added that the visit will support the Yemeni parties to reach an agreement on extending and expanding the truce. It also called on the Iranian-backed Houthi terrorist militia to cooperate with the United Nations and to listen to Yemeni calls for justice, accountability, and peace. Peace, however, is far from accessible at the moment in Yemen. The violence has not returned to earlier levels since the expiration of the ceasefire in October. The Houthis have warned that the restraint will not last long amid the current impasse and continued blockade of fuel imports. If the embargo is not eased, they said, they will reciprocally blockade a nearby waterway crucial to the global oil markets. Yet, the threat to the global oil supply is a risk the White House is uninterested in while running amid a war between Ukraine and Russia. For critics, the Biden administration's stance considering the payments to Yemeni public servants is too great a cost for establishing a new ceasefire and isn't a serious approach to ending the war. The status quo, in addition, leaves the Houthis little incentive to maintain a truce that delivers misery to the population it governs without any serious concessions around the blockade or payments to public service employees. Late last month, Omani negotiators were back in northern Yemen, urging the Houthis to sit down with the Saudis to discuss both issues. The Houthis rejected the offer and stressed on paying the salaries of all public servants, lifting the blockade of the northern port of Hodeidah and Sana'a airport. And then the parties can sit together to negotiate other terms. Facing the reality of the Houthis escalating their attacks, the Biden administration could dig in and refuse to meet Houthi demands while fending off congressional opposition to the war. According to analysts, the Biden administration diplomacy is ongoing, but it isn't clear it's going anywhere, making a resurgence of violence now seem inevitable.
A conference entitled Towards Sustainable Peace and Democracy in Yemen to be held in Washington next Monday. The conference aims to discuss the different scenarios and the best ways to reach a permanent ceasefire and build a lasting peace. It will also discuss how to reach a peaceful agreement, transitional treatment of violations, and to achieve fair compensation and accountability in Yemen. The number of internally displaced Yemenis decreased significantly during the past year, 2022, to be at least in the 3 years. The International Organization for Migration reported that displacements decreased by more than 61% in 2021 and 2022. Civil society organizations in Yemen have condemned the abduction of a number of social media activists by the terrorist Houthi militia in Sana'a. Civil society organizations expressed their strong condemnation of these heinous practices and the continued kidnapping and detention of people whose freedom of expression is protected by the law. The suffering of women in Houthi-controlled areas has aggravated significantly. The rebels continue to impose male guardian or mahram to confine the movement of women. Such measures have been widely condemned by the Yemenis inside and outside the country. The following report gives more details.
Yemeni women live in a country which is one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. Over the past few years, inflation has risen dramatically and food costs more, especially in the south of the country. People sometimes rely on neighbors for food and money when they find themselves choosing between buying food and paying rent. The last couple of years have been the worst due to the continuous increase in the prices of food and medicine. Price rises are forcing these women to reduce their meals to one a day, and many have restored to begging. At the end of the day, if people go to sleep with a full stomach, they praise God for surviving another day. As the conflict drags on, a 6-month ceasefire expired last October, the economic collapse that has become a key element in the Yemeni crisis has touched almost everyone. But as low levels of international aid funding force cuts in programs like food rations, over time husbands and fathers have been killed or detained, and families have been forced apart for economic reasons or because of geographic split imposed by the warring parties. An uptick in gender-based violence may also be promoting women to taking their children and run. Families headed by women are particularly vulnerable to hardships that result from the ongoing conflict, shortage in aid funding, and economic shocks. The armed conflict in Yemen has exacerbated discrimination and inequalities. Women are in general struggling from unequal access to services and resources, and decision-making is often made by men in their communities. Even before the war, around half of Yemenis lived in poverty. Now most of people live under the poverty line, and 90 million are food insecure, a situation that is projected to remain the same or get worse. Women in Yemen often have fewer economic assets than men, whether lands, homes or belongings. They often do have skills refined at home, and some Yemeni women are drawing on them and try and earn money. That income is neither stable nor enough to support families. According to UNFPA, others are worse off, particularly the 4.3 million Yemenis who have been forced to flee their homes. Of that group, 77% are women and children, and 26% of their households are headed by women, up from 9% before the war. This jump is an indication of increased precarity because of the loss of male breadwinners, while discriminatory societal attitudes towards women's economic engagement and movement remain unchanged. For years, many of businesses rely on imported raw materials. When the local currency deteriorates, these materials become scarce and overpriced, and small businesses owners are usually unable to obtain loans to tide them over when things get tough. Some aid groups are focusing on women-led families, or at least the most needy ones. They target over 1,000 women-led households in South Yemen, though needs are rising. Aid, at least as it is currently designed, may not be the long-term answer for women trying to support their families on their own. That's in part because Yemeni women are often not included in community groups or known to local leaders that aid organizations look to when structuring their programs. Therefore, humanitarian actions often fails to hear women's voice fully. And therefore does not act upon them and their priorities.
In Hodeidah, a campaign was carried out to remove all military fortifications previously put by the Houthi militia. The campaign aimed at facilitating the movement of traffic and citizens in the liberated areas in Hodeidah.
To ease the movement of trucks and cars, we are conducting this campaign to remove the Houthi military fortifications in the countryside of the governorate. These fortifications have posed an obstacle to the free movement of people. These fortifications have prevented the movement of people in the countryside of Hais. The road was crowded because it was used for only one way rather than two ways.
أنا خارج ألعب قهوة أصحابي وهو الرمو علينا إن إحنا لو الرمو قعلي أصحابي صاروا يدعوا أصحاب المخيم بجنس صاروا شايفين. صعب إنه معي شنو رجل أقدرش ألعب مع أصحابي. أبقى داخل اللعب.
اصلا الولد ما بدهم اي حاجه، ولما يشوف اصحابه يلعبوا وهما برجل واحده يتعقد الولد الحركات والسمو هذا أثر علينا كلنا الوالدة والوالد.
كنت عادة نروح المصيف، كنت ألعب كورة وأجري برجلي وألعب مع أصحابي، بعدين أبي صغير والآن ما أقدرش.
In Taiz, dozens of officers and soldiers of the army organized a protest in front of the local authority building. Those military people denounced the failure to complete the procedures for including them in the list of military personnel. The protest comes after a series of protests to demand the Presidential Leadership Council to quickly pay their salaries, which have been suspended for 7 years now.
We're the senior members of the army and we've been enlisted 8 years ago. A number of committees were formed and out identities have been taken. We gave them all the insurances and we staged civil protests, but they do not respond to us. We demand that our salaries to be handed over immediately. We call upon the Presidential Leadership Council, the government, Minister of Defense and all authorities to pay our salaries that have been disrupted for 8 years for unknown reasons. Despite we have fought in the past 6 years in Sada, we haven't got the salaries. Among us now, some who were injured and have come today on walking cane to protest.
Government forces thwarted the violent Houthi attack on its position south of Ma'rib Governorate. Military sources said the terrorist Houthi militia launched the violent attack on the positions of government forces east and south of the city. Various types of weapons were used during those attacks. Informed sources said that the Houthi militia has forced all directors of police stations in Sana'a to attend what it called cultural courses. It is noteworthy that the Houthi militia is holding what it calls intensive cultural courses for all employees in various sectors to pass on their sectarian ideas and ensure their loyalty to them. The Human Rights Office in Al-Jawf Governorate released its final report, which documented thousands of Houthi violations against civilians by the rebel group. The following report has more details.
Al-Jawf Governorate has suffered a staggering number of Houthi militia violations against civilians since the movement's seizure of the governorate 3 years ago. To this day, the rebel group continues to practice heinous crimes and arbitrary repression against residents. The governorate's Human Rights Office tracked major crimes perpetrated by the Houthi militia over the last year, totaling around 3,500 violations spread across more than 10 districts. The breaches included 17 incidents of direct killing, 34 incidents of mine killing, 5 incidents of direct wounding, and 67 incidents of mine injuries, as well as 30 cases of kidnapping, 1,300 cases of forced displacement, and 45 cases of psychological trauma to friends and families of mine victims.
At the Human Rights Office in Al-Jawf Governorate, we've released the final report for the year 2022, in which we document the human rights violations committed throughout the year. The office monitored 3,495 cases of violations against civilians, distributed between direct killings, kidnapping, torture, mine planting, and many others. The militia has exacted horrific violations against civilians in the governorate. We call upon human rights organizations within or outside Yemen to bring an end to these flagrant violations.
Since the militia took control of the governorate, the residents of Al-Jawf have endured harsh living conditions that have forced thousands of families to relocate outside the governorate. Those who were unable to do so are subject to daily abuse by the militia's leaders, and Houthi mines in residential areas and farms continue to claim the lives of residents each month. The Houthis have precipitated a series of fuel and domestic gas shortages, increased the imposition of outrageous taxes, and infringed upon many civilians' fields on the false pretense that they belong to the militias.
The Houthis plunder residential homes, spread poverty, harvest diesel and gasoline, indiscriminately kill residents and infringe upon private property. No religion stands for that.
With each passing day, the tribesmen hope to resolve the long-running battle and bring an end to the tyrannical rulership of militias in Jouf Governorate.
Coming next. Dutch energy company acquires an Austrian firm amid government refusal. Welcome back. In Riyadh, the Yemeni government signed an agreement to establish an economic empowerment program to support Yemen. The Saudi Program for the Development and Reconstruction of Yemen said the agreement aims to establish a general framework for activating development cooperation in Yemen, addressing challenges related to agricultural production and improving access to markets. A global energy company took over oil production facilities in Yemen from another international company. Zenith Netherlands announced that it has agreed to acquire the energy assets of Vienna-based OMV in a deal worth more than $21.6 million. Such a move was rejected by the government, who claims that the latter firm does not have the needed standards and expertise. This report has more details.
Canada's Zenith Energy, through its subsidiary Zenith Energy Netherlands, has signed a share purchase agreement (SPA) with Austria-based integrated oil and gas company OMV to acquire the latter's assets in Yemen. Under the terms of the SPA, Zenith Netherlands will fully acquire OMV's entities that own productions and explorations assets in Yemen for a total consideration of $21.6 million. The entities include OMV Yemen Block S2 Exploration, OMV Jordan Block 3 Upstream, and OMV Block 70 Upstream, collectively called OMV Yemen. Zenith Netherlands has already paid $4.3 million in deposit, which will be returned by OMV as part of the transaction consideration after the closing of the deal. Zenith Energy currently owns 49% of Zenith Netherlands, after it sold a 51% stake to a Hong Kong-based company, Hengbo Industries. The existing production from the asset, and more importantly, the near-term future oil and natural gas production, indicated by the size of the reserves. Zenith believes that the country has extraordinary economic potential, especially in the respect of its oil and gas industry, and it shall seek to maximize its relationship with the local authorities to achieve their development objectives. OMV Yemen is one of the largest oil producers in the country, with a portfolio comprising a balance of immediate production and short and long-term growth opportunities. OMV Yemen Block S2 Exploration operates and owns a 44% stake in Block S2, alongside its partners Sinopec with a 37.5% stake, YOGC with 12.5%, and YRL with a 6% stake. Block S2 was discovered in 1992 by energy company Oxy and entered commercial operations in 2005, after OMV has acquired Priusage Energie International in 2003. The block produced an average of around 7,400 barrels of oils per day. In 2021, OMV Yemen holds a balanced exploration portfolio, with OMV Jordan Block 3 Upstream owning a 34% stake in Block 3 and OMV Block 70 Upstream with a 19.24% stake. Furthermore, OMV and Zenith Netherlands are expecting to sign a Transitional Services Agreement (TSA) during the completion of the transaction.
Here is the reminder of the main headlines. U.S. Special Envoy Tim Vanderkering visits the region to push for installed peace efforts. Office continue to impose restrictions of movement on women in the areas under their control. Human Rights Office in Najaf documents healthy violations committed against civilians in the city. This is the end of the news. It was Rishan Fuad. See you soon.